let's talk about the evolution of the e-commerce stack. So David, let's just talk through some shifts that we see. And just to set the context here, we're talking about really modern companies, right? And pretty large scale companies, right? So this doesn't necessarily apply to, maybe a smaller e-commerce business running on a platform. But before, a lot of companies, even really large scale, and you still see today a lot of companies running platforms, but we see a larger move to owned infrastructure. So that's sort of the migration from Shopify to modern JavaScript frameworks. You want to talk a little bit about that, David, and why we see that happening?
Yeah, so I guess this is, it depends on where you're at in the business, at the kind of business level, right? You start up, scale up, and scale out. But I think a lot of the time you end up building some basic systems. They do what you need them to do, and once you start growing, you want to differentiate yourself, and you want to start building out something that is potentially more custom and dealing with your demographics in a better way. And additionally, want to move quicker, right? Maybe you have your own engineering team at that point, and you're building several other engineering teams. Once you have that, there's probably a desire to start building out your own platform, and very much kind of catering on the e-commerce side. You're building out, that's your differentiator, right? I think especially in the Love Holidays world, we've decided to build our own e-commerce platform because that's how we become the best holiday finder for customers, and I think that's the same can be applied for most e-commerce sites as you start scaling up and then scaling out.
Sure, yeah, I think an interesting way to summarize that would be platforms are great. I mean, Shopify is really an incredible tool in many ways, but by nature it has to do many things for many types of users, and as you grow and focus, you reach the limitations of that.
Exactly, and I think it's the classic build versus buy, and figuring out at what point in your time, like I guess in the growth of your business, that you decide to do that. But
Sure.
Because accessibility of building your own platform and owning that, I think it means that a lot more people are building versus buying because of the versatility of what they can do with it.
Sure. All right, so third-party vendors and black box, machine learning and AI, I put that in quotes because that's a subject unto itself. But I think we're seeing a shift from some of those tools, again, as we think about companies that are scaling to massive volumes with more focus, more to an own data science function. And one example I'll give here is recommendations. So you see, I mean, there are tons and tons of third-party SaaS tools and plugins and everything for e-commerce. And a common one you see is recommendations, right? Like make the best recommendations, and it's sort of an outsourced algorithm of sorts. But more and more we're seeing people move towards own data science, and I think that's something that's happening inside of Love Holidays. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one, right? I think that like preset machine learning models and black box AI vendors, etc., they can only get you so far. And I think that once you start understanding the domain and the needs of your customer and the data that you have, it starts becoming quite apparent that having an in-house data science team to build out those models is going to get you there a lot faster over time. I think like you end, and that's where Love Holidays is at now, right? It takes a lot of time initially to kind of gear up and get that all set up and make sure that you have the right people to build out those models, but also to kind of think about what we should be looking at in the future. But once you have that, you can move a lot more quickly because of everything's in-house, the models and the underlying technology is understood, and we can make tweaks and we can continuously improve it to actually cater much better for our customers. I think there are the kind of black box recommendation engines that you just feed it data. But in fact, if you think about a holiday and all of the different combinations, and actually we know that for example, people that are in the south of England have a larger propensity to book Greek islands versus in the north of England. And once you start thinking about the complexities of demographics and holidays, it made a lot more sense for us not to potentially buy that system, but actually build it in-house so that we can own it and evolve it over time.
Sure. Very cool. We'll just, I'll quickly go through number 3, siloed data before to unified data in the warehouse. This is pretty common. I mean, there are still a huge number of companies who are in the process of making this shift or haven't made it yet, but I think most of our audience will really have a good handle on why that's important. The example here is many times, especially in an e-commerce context, you're using Google Analytics very heavily. I mean, it was sort of the standard tool for optimization in e-commerce, and then some sort of combination of internal platforms pulling data from the database and somehow combining all of that information to produce some sort of business intelligence, which is sort of a technical mess, versus leveraging a modern data warehouse like BigQuery and just dumping all of your data in there, which works way better. So let's skip to the last one because I want to be conscious of time. It's sort of common knowledge in e-commerce: speed equals better performance, better conversion rates, etc. And it's been that way for a while, but speed is really becoming mandatory. Recently, Google released news that they're going to have even more strict requirements around site speed. So David, talk to us about your experience dealing with that. It sounds like you've had a decade of dealing with sort of the front-end user experience in an e-commerce context. So tell us about site speed and how things have changed.
Yeah, so I think it's quite funny. I think we've put ourselves into this position by building complex applications driven by JavaScript. But I think that in performance is something that at Love Holidays and at Uswitch we proved that it had a significant impact on conversion. And but it's not just about the conversion side of things now. It's actually about SEO visibility. And over my kind of 10 years working in the front end, I've focused drastically on performance, not just because it gives you a better experience, but you tend to build better systems if you focus on performance systems. And nowadays, everyone is trying to kind of chase this performance goal, and now that Google has said it, it's obvious that we need to kind of ensure that we are at least adhering to some sort of principles around it. Driving better experience is one thing, but also ensuring that you're building something that is maintainable for the future. And the Google requirements is just that kind of last key point where I think a lot of companies that have probably been doing it maybe ad hoc have now sort of said, well, actually, we now need to do some serious work on this because in fact, it's going to affect our SEO, which then, of course, in turn affects your overall revenues if you're relying on that traffic source.
Yep. Kind of making performance a first principle as opposed to a project.
Exactly. Yeah.